Alright, we've got both of them taped together on the other side now. Now there's veneer tape is just a very thin paper tape that's got a light coating of glue on here that gets activated by water. On a veneer tape roll, the adhesive's actually on the outside of the tape, unlike a normal roll of tape. And you simply rip off a piece the size that you need, and then you need to wet it. So all I've done is just taken a sponge and put it in here. And the sponge should be pretty wet, have some water sticking out, and then all I'm going to do is use my finger, pull it through and wet it. Put it on. And you just smooth it out with your fingers. Try to get all the wrinkles out of it. A couple minutes, this is going to be dry. So we'll just leave it set. You don't want to get it too wet, or the glue's not going to stick. Too little water, and the glue's not going to stick. So it's one of those just right kind of things. And you'll know if it's not sticking or not, and you just have to kind of go by experience on that one. Okay, now we've got our tape on both pieces, and this first one is dried now. So what I can do is take this blue tape off. Very important to remember to take the blue tape off. If we go and veneer this, our substrate, with this tape still on, it's just going to show through. It's going to get pressed in there. You're never going to get it out, and you're going to see all these little pieces of tape from the other side. So it's a good thing to take it off right now. If I wasn't going to do my veneering, say, till tomorrow, if I was just putting these together ahead of time, I wouldn't have put this veneer tape on, because the veneer tape, because there's water in there, can cause the veneer to swell a little bit, and the edges could curl up a little bit. So I don't want to do this like 2 days ahead of time, or 3 days ahead of time, or even a day ahead of time. After I took the tape off, you can see what looks like a little bit of a gap here from this side. When I press it down with my finger, it goes away. So when that goes in the bag and gets pressed down, it's going to come out just fine. And you can double check by running your finger up and down that all the seams are good. This is a good looking seam. Next, we want to cut these pieces to the exact size of the substrate that we have here. It'll make it a lot easier when we go and stack things up and put it in the bag to have it the right size. Since we have a book match, we want to make sure that this seam ends up in the dead center of our panel. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to make a mark in the center on both ends of the substrate. Anytime I'm cutting veneer, I want to protect the table top that's underneath. I'm going to line both these up because I want to get the same pattern on both of them. I want to cut through both at the same time again. So I'm just going to get them so that they're lined up on both ends. Make sure the middle center line's lined up. Put a little bit more blue tape on here temporarily. And I can shift it around till I get something that I like. And this is, again, pretty uniform, so I'm not going to worry about it too much. For cutting this, since it's essentially a rough cut, I could use a utility knife. The reason I don't use a utility knife normally, like when we were doing the cutting for the seam, is because, particularly going with the grain, this is a fairly flimsy blade and it can actually follow the grain and not stay straight. In this particular case, I'm not that worried about that, so I can use my utility knife to cut through if I want. The only thing is, I got to be careful. If I come off the end of a piece of veneer, I can very easily rip it out. But since I'm cutting more through the center, I can use my knife. I'm just going to hold it. I'm just going to come out to about there. I'm not going to go all the way to the end. That one's loose. Make sure that my mark is on the seam again. Make sure that it hasn't shifted from there. And then I can make this final cut. Make sure it's loose all the way around. Now I have two of the exact same panels. Now the only thing left to do is do the exact same thing with my backer veneer. But this one I don't really care about center lines or anything like that, so I'm just going to cut this out. We don't have. Okay, now we have our substrates, our bookmatched panels, or our bookmatched veneers. When you've made something, when you've pieced together pieces of veneer like this, it's called, the technical term for it is a sketch face. So we have our two sketch faces here, and our two single pieces that we're going to use for backer veneer. The substrate we're going to use is MDF, which is a real common substrate to be used for veneering, especially getting furniture grade MDF. It's very, very smooth, it's very stable. The other thing that's used often is furniture grade particle board, which actually has a very smooth face as well. You don't want to veneer solid wood because solid wood expands and contracts, whereas this stays stable. This is the bottom caul that we're going to use to put into the vacuum bag, and I'll explain that again in a little bit. We're going to build our pile on here. And we want to start building the pile up and get everything in order, because when we're putting glue on, we don't want to be trying to figure out which way everything goes here. So I'm going to start with one of these face down. Remember, the veneer tape does not want to be up against the substrate. It wants to be on the other side. And then I'm going to put the substrate on. Since I did all that careful work earlier with lining up the center line and everything and cutting this exactly the same size, I don't have to worry about the center lines anymore. It's going to be in the center as long as I make sure this is on here evenly all the way around. Put the backer piece on. Next, we need to put a caul. And the caul's job is to distribute the pressure evenly across the veneer with the vacuum bag. This is also a caul. It's the bottom caul. It can be bigger than the piece that we're doing, because you'll see when it goes in the vacuum bag will come down, and it doesn't matter if this caul is bigger. If this caul is bigger though than the piece, if it was sticking out here, the vacuum bag would put pressure on the edges, and it could either break it off because the pressure is very great inside the bag, or it could remove pressure from the center. When you're using a 1/4 inch caul, it should be pretty much exactly the same size as the substrate. Because a 3/4 inch caul can hang over by about 1/4 inch without getting into trouble. The only thing is, when we put glue on here and it gets squeezed down, glue can actually come through the pores of the veneer. And if I just put this caul on here like this, I could conceivably glue this to my veneer, which I don't want. I'm using a non-stick surface down here below, but since this can be bigger, I can keep reusing this for multiple size panels. This, since it needs to be exactly the same size, I don't want to cut up expensive melamine every time I want to do a caul. So I can use cheaper MDF. What I need to do is put a piece of newsprint in between here, and then the glue will cause the newsprint to get glued to the veneer, which I can easily scrape and sand off, and then my caul will come off. So I put paper, caul, another piece of paper, my next sketch face, next substrate, next backer, paper, and then the top caul. Notice I've rounded the edges on the cauls. Just broke them with a piece of sandpaper. That way they don't have sharp edges that the vacuum bag can get caught on. So the top caul goes on.